The morning mist hung low over Turnberry Golf Club's championship course. The Scottish coastline stretched endlessly toward the horizon where gray clouds met pewter sea. It was 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in October, and Sean Connery stood on the first tee, his weathered hands wrapped around a driver that had seen more faithful service than most marriages. At 78, Sean still cut an imposing figure against the backdrop of the course he had played hundreds of times over the past 3 decades. His silver hair caught the pale morning light, and despite the early hour, he was impeccably dressed in traditional golf attire, pressed slacks, cashmere sweater, and leather shoes polished to mirror brightness. "You're early, even for you," came a familiar voice from behind him. Sean turned to see Michael Caine approaching, golf bag slung over his shoulder, trademark glasses slightly fogged from the morning air. At 75, Michael moved with the careful deliberation of a man who had learned to respect his body's limitations while refusing to surrender to them entirely. "Couldn't sleep," Sean replied, his Scottish accent still strong despite decades of international living. "Thought I'd get a few holes in before the world wakes up and starts demanding things from us." They had been friends for 46 years, ever since meeting on the set of The Man Who Would Be King in 1975. Their friendship had survived Hollywood politics, career rivalries, marriages, divorces, and the peculiar challenges that come with aging in an industry that worships youth. These Tuesday morning golf games had become sacred ritual, two old warriors finding peace in the rhythm of swing, walk, and conversation. "How many times have we played this course?" Michael asked, pulling his driver from his bag with practiced ease. "Not nearly enough," Sean replied, but his usual enthusiasm seemed muted this morning. Something in his posture, shoulders slightly hunched, jaws set in a way that suggested internal struggle, caught Michael's attention. They played the first 4 holes in relative quiet, their conversation limited to discussions of club selection and good-natured ribbing about missed putts. But Michael, who had built a career on observing human behavior, noticed the subtle signs. Sean's grip was tighter than usual, his follow-through abbreviated, his typical running commentary about course conditions notably absent. It was on the fifth tee, a par 3 overlooking the Firth of Clyde, that the morning's tranquility was broken. Sean had just hit what should have been a routine iron shot to the green, but the ball sailed wide right, landing in the rough with an audible thud. For most golfers, this would warrant nothing more than mild frustration. For Sean, who prided himself on precision in all things, it seemed to trigger something deeper. "Bloody hell," he muttered, but the words carried more weight than the poor shot deserved. "It's just one hole, mate," Michael said gently, sensing undercurrents he couldn't quite identify. Sean stood motionless for a long moment, staring at the spot where his ball had disappeared into the thick Scottish grass. The morning wind picked up, carrying the salt smell of the nearby ocean and the distant cry of seagulls. "It's not the shot," Sean said finally, his voice quieter than Michael had heard it in years. They walked to Sean's ball in silence, their footsteps muffled by the damp fairway. Michael waited, understanding that his friend was wrestling with something that had nothing to do with golf scores. "I went to the doctor last week," Sean said suddenly, as if the words had been building pressure inside him and finally found release. "Routine checkup, you know. Nothing dramatic." Michael stopped walking. In 46 years of friendship, Sean had rarely volunteered information about his health. The man who had played James Bond, who had embodied physical invincibility for an entire generation, treated any admission of physical vulnerability as a personal failure. "And?" Michael asked, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. Sean found his ball nestled in the rough and stood over it with his wedge, but made no move to take the shot. Instead, he looked out over the water, where early morning fishing boats dotted the horizon like toys in a bathtub. "Memory tests," Sean said, the words coming out in a rush, as if speaking them quickly might somehow lessen their impact. "Simple things, really. Remember these words, repeat this sequence, tell me what you had for breakfast 3 days ago." The silence that followed stretched between them like a held breath. Michael felt his chest tighten with understanding and dread. "The early stages," they said. "Might be nothing, might be the beginning of something." Sean's voice maintained its characteristic strength, but underneath, Michael could hear something he had never associated with his friend: fear. "Gry shot," Michael whispered. The funny thing is, as Sean continued, finally addressing his ball but still not swinging, I can remember every line of dialogue from films I made 50 years ago. I can tell you exactly what you were wearing the day we met. That ridiculous orange shirt you thought made you look distinguished, but yesterday I couldn't remember my grandson's middle name. Had to call Jason to ask. Michael watched his friend's face, seeing for the first time the vulnerability that Sean had spent a lifetime hiding behind carefully constructed personas. The man who had commanded screens and stages around the world was suddenly just a 78-year-old human being, facing the possibility of losing the very thing that had defined his identity, his sharp, quick, endlessly curious mind. I keep thinking about all the things I meant to say, Sean continued, finally taking a practice swing that sent turf flying. All the conversations I put off because I thought there would always be more time. All the moments with Micheline, with the children, with friends like you that I was too proud or too busy to fully appreciate. He took the shot then, a perfect wedge that landed softly on the green and rolled to within 6 feet of the pin. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. His golf game remained flawless while his greatest fear was losing control of everything else. You know what terrifies me most? Sean asked as they walked toward the green. It's not forgetting the films or the fame or even my own name eventually. It's the idea that I might forget why any of it mattered in the first place. Michael struggled to find words. In nearly half a century of friendship, he had seen Sean face down difficult directors, brutal reviews, personal tragedies, and career setbacks with unwavering confidence. This was different. This was Sean Connery, the man, not the legend, confronting mortality in its cruelest form. Do you remember, Michael said carefully, that night in Morocco during The Man Who Would Be King? We were stuck in that awful hotel, no air conditioning, nothing to do but talk. John smiled slightly. You told me about your father's workshop, how he could fix anything with his hands but never learned to read properly. And you told me about your milk rounds in Edinburgh, how you'd practice accents while delivering bottles, pretending to be different characters for each customer. I remember. That's who you are, mate. Not the accent, not the characters, but the boy who was curious enough to practice voices in an empty street at dawn. That doesn't go away. That's not something that gets lost. They had reached the green now, and Sean lined up his putt with the same methodical precision he brought to everything. But before he could strike the ball, he straightened up and looked directly at Michael. I'm scared, Michael. For the first time since I was a boy, I'm genuinely frightened. The admission hung between them in the morning air. Michael felt the weight of being trusted with his friend's deepest fear, the responsibility of being present for someone who had spent a lifetime being strong for everyone else. Of course you are, Michael said simply. You'd be mad not to be, but you're not facing this alone. Micheline knows something's wrong, but I haven't told her about the tests yet. I know how to, the same way you just told me, with honesty. She's been with you through everything else. She deserves to face this with you too. Sean made the putt. Of course he did. And they moved to the sixth tee in contemplative silence. The course was beginning to come alive around them, groundskeepers in the distance, the first foursome of regular players visible on the far fairway, the clubhouse showing signs of morning activity. I've been thinking about legacy, Sean said as they waited for the green ahead to clear. What it means, what lasts. I always thought it would be the films, Bond certainly, maybe The Last Crusade or The Hunt for Red October, something people could point to and say, that's what Sean Connery left behind. And now, I think maybe legacy is simpler than that. Maybe it's Tuesday morning golf games with an old friend. Maybe it's the way Micheline laughs at my terrible jokes. Maybe it's teaching Jason's kids to tie proper knots or telling them stories about their grandfather's adventures. Michael watched Sean tee up his ball, noting how his friend's hands remained steady despite everything he had just revealed. You know what your real legacy is, Michael said, is that you made everyone around you want to be better at their job. Directors, actors, crew members, everyone rose to your level because you demanded excellence from yourself first. That sounds suspiciously like something you'd say at my funeral, Sean replied with a hint of his old humor. Well, you'll have to stick around to hear the full speech then, won't you? They played the remaining holes with a different rhythm than usual. The conversation flowed more freely, touching on memories they had shared, regrets they carried, hopes they still harbored. Sean spoke about his desire to spend more time at his home in the Bahamas, to read books that had nothing to do with potential film projects, to learn to cook properly so he could surprise Micheline with something other than his infamous scrambled eggs. The thing about memory, Sean said as they approached the 18th green, is that it's not really about remembering everything perfectly. It's about choosing what matters enough to hold on to and what matters to you. Sean considered this as he lined up his final putt of the round. This, right here, Tuesday morning with a friend who's known me long enough to call me on my nonsense. The feeling of a well-struck golf ball, the way Michaeline looks when she's reading by the window in the afternoon light, the pride in my children's voices when they introduce me to their friends. He made the putt a straight, confident stroke that found the center of the cup. Those things don't disappear, even if the details get fuzzy around the edges. The feeling of them, the importance of them, that stays. Walking back to the clubhouse, Michael felt the weight of what his friend had shared, the honor of being trusted with fear and hope in equal measure. They had started the morning as two old actors playing golf. They were finishing it as two human beings who had reminded each other what friendship actually meant. Same time next week? Sean asked as they cleaned their clubs. Wouldn't miss it for the world. And Michael, thank you for listening, for not trying to fix everything, for just being here. That's what friends do, mate. We show up, especially when showing up is hard. As they parted ways in the parking lot, Michael watched Sean's car disappear down the winding road that led back to the village. He knew that his friend faced an uncertain future, that the coming months and years would bring challenges that no amount of fame or talent could overcome. But he also knew something else. Sean Connery had spent a lifetime playing heroes on screen, but this morning on a golf course overlooking the Scottish coast, he had shown Michael what real courage looked like, not the absence of fear, but the willingness to share that fear with someone who cared enough to help carry it. 3 weeks later, Michael received a call from Sean. He had told Micheline about the test results. They had cried together, then made plans together. They were going to take that trip to Italy they had been discussing for 20 years. They were going to have dinner with the grandchildren every Sunday. They were going to stop putting off the conversations that mattered. And, Sean added before hanging up, I'm reading a book about memory techniques. Apparently, there are ways to keep the important stuff sharp even when other things start to slip. Of course there are, Michael replied. Leave it to you to turn forgetting into a project you can master. See you Tuesday, Michael. I'll be there, mate. I'll always be there. The line went quiet, but the promise lingered. Because sometimes the most important victories happen not on movie screens or stages, but on Tuesday mornings when two old friends choose to face uncertainty together, armed with nothing but honesty, history, and the quiet courage that comes from knowing you're not walking alone. It wasn't just golf. It was the reminder that the conversations we put off are often the ones that matter most. And the people who love us enough to listen to our fears are the ones who help us find the strength to keep playing one hole at a time.